Hello, I am Zinfogel. Today we're going to talk about the Johto grids released a couple months ago, which include Bugsy, Whitney, and Will. Well then, let's get started. First up, we have Bugsy and Beedrill, a 3-star bug-type striker. So, Bugsy was clearly designed as a pool filler. Back at the game's launch, he just couldn't make a name for himself, and that stayed true even when the game progressed to favor 3v3 content. Bugsy makes for a fascinating case study. People would rather off-type 2K Master Mode before humoring him, despite the fact that he fulfills a starved niche as a free-to-play bug-type striker. The shittiest part of Bugsy's kit are his moves. Felstinger peaks at 52 base power, but when Bugsy scores a knockout with it, he buffs attack by 3 stages. In theory, Bugsy can fish for attack buffs, but it's very difficult to denial with an unboosted Felstinger. And in practice, your striker wants to maximize their attack before attacking anyway. Twin Needle has 24 base power, but it hits twice. If you account for a double hit, it peaks at 48 base power. It also has a 20% chance to inflict regular poison, and the double hit improves that probability up to 36%. Twin Needle is weaker than Felstinger, and the double hit worsens its damage roll peaks. The poison proc doesn't do much for Twin Needle either. Almost every Centermon has Listen Poison 9 to counter Toxic. Twin Needle suffers as a byproduct of that, and Bugsy is a bug-type sync pair, so he lacks cohesion with toxic power users. Poison can be handy in Legendary Gauntlet though. You can counter Uxie's healthy advantage with it, but it's less useful for Cobalion because it gains Antitoxin after 1 status recovery, although you can combine Poison with a Burn Source or put Bugsy in a throwaway team used for the status. As for Bugsy's positives, he has 460 attack upon Mega Evolution, and he's got innate critical strike too. That's respectable, the potential for damage is right there, but Felstinger and Twin Needle are categorically utility moves. They cannot serve a striker no matter how many multipliers you pump into them. However, a consequence of Bugsy's raw strength is that it fuels his sync move. Bugsy's sync is nerfed because of the Mega Evolution, but it still does solid damage, especially under Box Zone. Bugsy is similar to Seabold in many ways. Bugsy's moves ruin his output, but he's not irredeemable. We can salvage the nuke. Speaking of Bugsy's stats, he's very fragile. He has similar bulk to that of Ekmon's, but his speed is pretty good. When Beedrill Mega Bulbs, it gains Amped at 1. That means when Beedrill crits an enemy, it buffs speed by 1. For what it's worth, Bugsy has excellent gauge management. He's got low gauge moves coupled with great speed generation, so he can carry the gauge of slow supports such as Hop or Classic Red. As for Bugsy's trainer move, it buffs plus 3 evasion and +1 speed. A trainer move like this is typically worthless because it only serves to dodge AoE damage. But what's cool here is that the DNA built Bugsy's grid around evasion buffs. He gained Blind Spot and Bob and Weave. Evasion is one of the toughest multipliers to support, but Bugsy takes care of that by himself. Bugsy's other trainer move is Sure Crit. As the name suggests, it has Sure Crit. This trainer move actually serves Bugsy very well because he is a nuke-based striker. Rather than dicking around with Felstinger, Bugsy can apply Sure Crit to guarantee his sync crits. Bugsy's nuke meets a degree of reliability a lot of strikers don't have. Sure Crit also serves as a non-attacking action. Bugsy can use it to conserve status changes such as Super Effective Up Next and Physical Move Up Next. Now, you might notice Bugsy's kit suffers from a distinct lack of crit buffs, despite having passives that depend on critical hits. DNA intended for Bugsy to use Sure Crit and nothing but Sure Crit to score critical hits. Which is a very funny meme, thank you DNA. Bugsy demands heavy babysitting. Even Wolfric buffs +4 attack and +1 crit, so he can pair with Classic Red. So we have to recruit some of the heavier supports, such as Hilbert, Hop, Sonia, or Aaron, which adds a layer of complexity to Bugsy's team compositions. So let's check out what the DNA blessed Bugsy with. Blind Spot and Bob and Weave are free multipliers thanks to Bugsy's trailer move. Bugsy gained Toxic Power 3. Remember, Twin Needle can apply poison, and Twin Needle Hostile Environment 1 doubles the chance. The idea is that Bugsy can bruise an enemy, have reasonable chances to proc poison, and deal better damage on subsequent attacks. Bugsy also gained Twin Needle Ramming Speed. His terror move buffs +1 speed, and he can further speed buffs with Amped at 1. DNA is clearly shoving Twin Needle DPS rhetoric. We need to sit on this one for a bit. Bugsy is unique among strikers because both of his moves are so poor, they compete with one another. And is it really worth having this conversation, knowing which move is better when the difference is ephemeral in the grand scheme of things? You bet your ass we are having that conversation in this channel. It's easy to believe Twin Needle is stronger because it has ramming speed while Felstinger doesn't. There is a multiplier of difference here. It makes logical sense. But the sniveling spineless cowards at DNA are trying to trick you into thinking that. Multipliers don't do a whole lot for sync pairs like Bugsy. The most egregious culprit here is Toxic Power 3, so let's use it as an example. Toxic Power 3 Bugsy assumes a linear DPS, so we also want Twin Needle Ramming Speed and Bob and Weave. Let's check out how much base power it actually has, assuming the target is poisoned. Optimally, Twin Needle reaches 57 base power. The problem is the conditional nature of Toxic Power 3. Bugsy has to apply poison before he can enjoy the boost, and usually he has to go for that roll compression because of his heavy support demands. Against a healthy target, Twin Needle reaches 48 base power. So what happens when we drop Toxic Power 3 but take all of the Twin Needle tiles? We reach 54 base power. Yes, it's 3 base power weaker than optimal Twin Needle, but now we have 14 energy to spare to do whatever the hell we want. We no longer depend on a conditional, we gain grid versatility, and we reach a similar damage threshold to Toxic Power 3. Bugsy's grids are unconventional because Twin Needle and Felstinger are so pitifully weak that gridding base power tiles has similar value to gridding multipliers. But Zin, you still haven't answered the question. What's better, Twin Needle or Felstinger? So, Twin Needle has to maximize ramming speed just to catch up with Felstinger. Twin Needle usually cannot afford all of its base power tiles, while Felstinger can. And the thing about Twin Needle is that, since it hits twice, its damage rolls peak lower than Felstinger. But the key advantage that elevates Felstinger is that it can grab Super Victory. When Bugsy knocks out an enemy with a move, not a sync move, he gains Super Effective up next. This passive decimates Twin Needle. Pick Twin Needle can do something like this, assuming of course Bob and Weave and Blind Spot for the nuke. This way we can reach 96 base power if I recall correctly. Yeah, counting for a double hit. But Pick Felstinger can do something like this. Know that we can grab all of the Felstinger tiles as well as Super Victory. Felstinger reaches 93 base power. Yes, it's 3 base power weaker than Twin Needle, but when you account for Super Effective up next, and the fact that Bugsy is not obligated to maximize speed anymore, Felstinger is just superior. This is mostly a lesson on practicality. Don't fixate on numbers, focus on the function, and that is a lesson you can apply on a lot of things in life. My apologies for going on that tangent, but hopefully I made my case. The first gridded Bugsy showcases didn't even consider Super Victory, because they laser focused on Twin Needle ramming speed. And I made that mistake as well. If you check the May Dynamine community post I made some months ago, I recommended a Twin Needle grid. I am not infallible, I make mistakes, so don't take my word for granted. So, now that we know how to grid Bugsy, let's check his utility. Fast Runner is useless. The only battles that currently lower evasion are extreme battles, in which Bugsy will probably be an off-Rion pair. Bugsy also has Fierce Entry 1, Critical Might 1, and Victory Lap. Critical Might buffs Bugsy's attack when he crits an enemy. Victory Lap applies Sure Crit when Bugsy knocks out an opponent with a move. Similar idea to Fell Stinger, but it applies Sure Crit instead. I don't see practical game plans where you could use Victory Lap. It doesn't proc when you knock out an enemy with a sync move. So it's not like you can pair Bugsy's Sure Crit trainer move plus Victory Lap to start a chain of Sure Crit denials. All these buffs are cute and all, but they overlap with Bugsy's support demands, and this half-ass self-sufficiency doesn't justify the loss in power Bugsy will incur. A standard Bugsy looks like this. I explained why Fell Stinger is better than Twin Needle at length, but Bugsy is first and foremost a nuke-based striker. Blind Spot carries the bulk of his offense, and he gains nifty little perks for taking Fierce Sync, such as the improved attack stat as well as Amped at 1. By that train of thought, you can make an argument for dropping Fell Stinger base power in favor of both syncing tiles. It's up to preference, but Arceus knows that Bugsy's DPS needs all the help it can get. So there are a couple ways to play Bugsy optimally. It's either box zone or with defense debuffs. Costumingo is support demands overlap with Bugsy. He benefits from Hop or Hilbert as much as Bugsy does. If your Ingo is 1-5, you can justifiably nuke with Bugsy instead. What I like doing is nuking center Fierce Sync to put it on a range where Fell Stinger will allow me to start a chain of super victories, and Ingo's quick attack softens up the sides so Bugsy can pick them off. Alternatively, you can bring a Screech partner. You want to debuff left to deny its turn Fierce Sync, then knockout right with Fell Stinger to carry super victory over to Bugsy's second sync and delete the center. I am positive Bugsy can handle Buckwick Lucian with such a setup. When all is said and done, I think Bugsy is a better striker than Noni X Cosma. Blind Spot and Super Victory are miles better than whatever garbage Cosma can muster. He now needs his 630X to outdamage Bugsy. Ain't that a cruel twist of fate? Bugsy can also off-type 2K Master Mode. It's much easier with Costumingo thanks to Boxon and Defense Crush 9, but anything is possible if you put your heart into it. You might notice that in both of the grids I showed, I skipped this attack plus 20 tile. Bugsy's raw attack is so large that this tile doesn't have a significant impact on his output. Bugsy has to drop Fell Stinger tiles in order to afford the attack plus 20. You are trading 10% of Bugsy's DPS for 3% of his nuke. To me, that's not worth it when Bugsy's DPS is as miserable as it is. Now, Bugsy out-nukes a lot of Bug-type strikers, but if you want to humor DPS Bugsy, it's justifiable if you have a 3-5 Custom Ingo. Ingo's nuke is aeons ahead of Bugsy's, in which case Bugsy is better off slapping enemies around with Fell Stinger. Fell Stinger DPS remains superior to Twin Needle if you fish for Toxic Power 3. Ingo has to use his trainer move twice to maximize Blind Spot, so he circumstantially buffs Bugsy's evasion by +2. Bugsy can use his turn move once for +5 evasion, which is enough to fuel Bob and Weave. So Bugsy has 2 to 3 chances of proccing poison before first sink. If you set it up right, this is the best DPS Beedrill can muster. But if you don't want to bother with the Toxic Power 3 RNG, Twin Needle DPS is more consistent, but Bugsy is obligated to cap out ramming speed, so you are forced to run Hilbert or Sonia. Bugsy can also create the Critical Might 1, so he can pair with the Single Blue, although Ingo would suffer as a result from it. But let me be crystal clear. DPS Bugsy is awful. He loses a ton of power when he's not allowed to Mega Evolve. But if you have a 3-5 custom Ingo and you don't like your other bug type strikers for one reason or another, you can salvage Bugsy on that front. I think Bugsy is a legitimate bug type striker. Without Bug Zone, he takes more finesse, but Bugsy can clear 2K Master Mode when paired with Hop. But honestly, I just wanted to release this analysis to quash Twin Needle once and for all. Up next, we have Whitney and Miltank, a 4-star normal type tech. Whitney is in a bit of a funny spot. There is the whole haha Miltank traumatized children back in the day, yet Whitney is a normal type gym leader in a Pokemon game that sells super effective damage. I haven't seen very many Whitney showcases. She's just unappealing due to the scope of her utility. Whitney is stuck with Stomp and Body Slam. The base power is awful, so it's all about the side effects. Stomp has a 30% chance to flinch, while Body Slam has a 30% chance to paralyze. Flinch has picked some steam thanks to Legendary Gauntlet. Its purpose is similar to Sleep. Flinch prevents damage and delays the enemy. If you rotate the flinch carefully, your partners can engage in battle more often on successful flinches. Flinch is amazing in Gauntlet because it minimizes the defensive counterplay you need to survive a legendary arena. Flinch also enables Harry, Fall Fighting, and their Sync derivatives. Paralysis is less useful by comparison. Almost every Centermon has Listen Paralysis 8, so full paralysis happens once every blue moon. Paralysis can at least enable Paralysis Energy and Dirty Fighting, and it's a great status condition to counter Uxie, Cobalion, and Tornadus in Legendary Gauntlet. Whitney has her utility, but it's unimpressive. She feels like a premium Eggmon. Whitney has X speed. Her train move raises defense by a couple of stages, and it heals her by the equivalent of a potion. Whitney's trainer move promotes tanking, but her defensive stats are nearly identical to that of Tech Eggmons, whose bulk is patently awful. Endgame content pops Miltank like a balloon. Whitney's only passive is Marstring 2, that's a 30% chance to raise attack when attacking. There is some potential for self-sufficiency in there. Lastly, Whitney's innate tech multiplier is Static Shock. Whitney cannot paralyze reliably, but her nuke is strong. Whitney's attack stat is passable, and DNA gave all normal type damage sources higher base power to help them catch up a bit. There is not much else to say about Whitney. She feels like the prototype DNA used to create Tech Eggmons. The fact that she's a normal type also hurts her offensive viability. However, Whitney is a big winner of the grid lottery. DNA identified the things Whitney was good at and made her better at those things. Whitney also gained a boatload of passives. There are countless ways you can configure Whitney to fit your needs. First up, we have a nuking mode. Whitney gained Inertia, Interference Sync, and Sinking Tiles. At maximum efficiency, Whitney matches Non-EX Sydney and Mask Royal, which is a pretty tall order for a 4-star tech who cannot deal super effective damage. Whitney can handle inertia with X speed, but you probably want Hilbert to enable her anyway. The bigger issue is activating Static Shock and Interference Sync. Whitney gained Stomp Aggravation 1 and Body Slam Hostile Environment 1 to double her procs up to 60%. While the odds are much better, they remain unreliable, and Whitney doesn't have enough energy to afford all of these passives at once. There are a couple of ways to approach Whitney's nuke. You either have Whitney handle one of her multipliers, while your third handles what Whitney is not focusing on. Or you can bring a tech who can handle both multipliers. Do remember, Interference Sync is not flinch either. Interference Sync activates with flinch, trap, or confusion, so it gives Whitney some flexibility. The more reliable Whitney enablers are Sophocles, Bogner, Custom Lily, and Tech Munchlax, but the absolute best is Tech Venomode. Tech Venomode has Infestation and Troublemaker 1 Stun Spore. It's by far and away the most reliable tech who compresses both paralysis and interference. You can run Whitney plus Hilbert plus Tech Venomode, and Whitney can engage her funny numbers. As for Whitney's DPS, she gained Dirty Fighting 3 and Ramming Speed. They play off Whitney's sync multipliers, so that's great, they are cohesive. Dirty Fighting procs with any status condition, which may matter if Whitney is not nuking. Just don't expect massive numbers from Stomp or Body Slam. It's more like you can beef them up a little on the way to better passives. Whitney also gained Defense Crush 4. That's a 50% chance to debuff defense on successful attacks. That is pretty good. Just to put the things into perspective, you get better damage when Whitney targets an enemy with -1 defense and Train Body 5 than when she drops Defense Crush 4 in favor of a sinking tile. In Legendary Gauntlet, Whitney has all the time in the world to accumulate debuffs and strengthen subsequent attacks. Whitney also gained some self-sufficiency. We have Fierce Sentry 1 and Mad Strength 4 to accumulate attack buffs faster. Then there is X-Speed Mupon Refresh 3 backed by Critical Eye 1. Whitney can maximize her critical hit rate while capping out inertia. This is huge for Gauntlet. Remember, Whitney can raise attack with her innate Mad Strength 2. For all intents and purposes, Whitney is a self-sufficient striker in long-form content, so she can spare crit support for another Gauntlet team. Lastly, Whitney gained defensive utility. She has Trainer Move Mupon Refresh 3 and Master Healer 1. That's a very potent recovery. Whitney also gained Fire Guard, Ice Guard, and Grass Guard. Just a little nod to Thick Fat and Sap Zipper in the main series games. Don't get too excited about the tank Whitney. Whitney is not good at tanking. But you know how in Legendary Gauntlet sometimes you have to bring a good striker to carry a shitty tank? Whitney is the shitty tank in that instance. But if Whitney has to tank, she can handle it. She deters damage with a Stomp, so it works. Whitney has a cornucopia of options, but she's limited by energy. If Whitney could grab all of her passives, people would rate her a lot higher. But the reality is that Whitney has to make compromises. Whitney can do standard tech clears in 2K Master Mode. Just have Tech Venom Mode inflict paralysis and trap on everything, then delete the left first sync and center second sync. But if it wasn't clear by now, I think Whitney is at her strongest in Legendary Gauntlet. Her utility is unreal. She can flinch lock, paralyze, debuff, she can nuke, she can frontline. Whitney can legitimately carry a team. If you want Whitney to nuke, I would suggest gridding Body Slam Hostile Environment 1. Legendary Arena bosses recover from status constantly, so you will be reapplying paralysis a lot. You can fish for Defense Crush 4 while doing that. if you don't want to bring offensive support, Whitney can handle her own crit with X speed, move point refresh 3, and critical eye 1. The idea is spamming a stomp to buy time until Whitney can obliterate the boss with her nuke. I would suggest bringing a paralysis applicator because Whitney doesn't want to distract herself from spamming a stomp. And if Whitney misses out on her innate static shock, you lose a gigantic portion of her nuke. If Striker Whitney doesn't interest you, she can enable instead. You can grab both Hostile Environment 1 and Aggravation 1 to improve Whitney's disruption. Same idea as Tech Snorlax, but the MGRs and Defense Crush 4 make Whitney better at the role. Lastly, Whitney can handfist tank mode. Prior to her grid, I use Whitney as a tank for Archie and assorted obscene strikers. If Whitney fails too many flinches, she can fix herself with a trainer move. It works fine. Whitney's grid glow up is nothing short of impressive, but she still falls behind on-type strikers. If it weren't for the Legendary Gauntlet, she would be a little whatever, but there is a game mode that Whitney unironically dominates, which is hilarious. Last but not least, we have Will and Xatu, a 4-star Psychic type tech. Also known as the lead 4 member with the best hips. Why does Will have an hourglass shape? I don't know, that's not for me to answer. Anyway, let me preface this by saying Will is a good sync pair. Much of his success can be attributed to Store Power and Impervious. Back on co-op meta, enemy sync moves reset your stat races. Will just didn't care about that, and Store Power reached some of the scariest damage ceilings before we entered the age of 4-bar moves. Will's stats are also solid. He can strike, he is tanky, he is very fast. What else could you want? Unfortunately, Will's viability met its untimely demise with the release of Bianca, who was soon followed by 6-star EX Giovanni. Will got power crept. The metagame surrounding Will evolved leaps ahead of his capabilities. Will's store power just cannot compete with Giovanni, Bianca, Liar, Cygnus Ultramin. Will's nuke is good, but it cannot compete with 6-star EX Giovanni's spread nuke. And Will's grid doesn't change this situation. Again, Will is good, but there are better striker options. So we have to look at Will through a different lens. What can Will do that other psychic types can't? Will has access to Confuse Ray and Air Slash. The former inflicts confusion guaranteed, while the latter has a 30% chance to flinch. These moves are easy to ignore because Will favors store power DPS, but Will's grid improves these moves for a new utility angle we can tackle. Will's trainer move is a little strange. It copies an enemy's stat races and doubles them. For example, if an enemy has +1 special attack, Will buffs +2 special attack. Just keep in mind that Will's trainer move takes precedence over his current buffs. Let's say that Will is at +6 special attack and he copies +2 special attack. The trainer move takes priority, so Will lowers his special attack by -2. That's usually not an issue, but it happens to me accidentally because I forget how Will's trainer move works. Furthermore, enemies don't buff a whole lot, so there isn't much for Will to copy. He demands babysitting from supports like Sabrina, Lyra, Faulkner, Custom Jasmine, Custom Lily, or Cygnus Chris. The point of Will's trainer move is hoarding stat races to fuel store power. Store power works a little like a good form. The more you raise stats, the more base power you get. However, store power caps at +11 buffs, counting crit, so it's easy to maximize. Will's innate tech multiplier is Fusion Strike. Confuse Ray is 100% accurate, so Will handles his nuke no problem. So, let's check how Will's Grid lets us salvage him. Will gain a nuking mode with Interference Sync and Sync Power Flux. If you recall from Whitney's Grid, Interference Sync activates when the enemy is flinching, trapped, or confused. Will is obligated to inflict confusion for his innate Fuzzy Strike, so Interference Sync is free. Sync Power Flux is the sync equivalent of Power Flux. The fuller the gauge, the more damage you get. Sync Power Flux calculates damage the moment you click your sync move. You should wait until your move gauge is full before syncing. If you play with 4 bars in 2K Master Mode, you lose a bit of damage, but once you understand the conditional, it's easy to adjust. Now, Will doesn't outnuke Giovanni at -6 special defense, but the difference lies in ease of setup. Will's nuke is stupid easy to set up. It's like one step below Sydney. You just cast Confuse Ray and his nuke is ready. Will can delete Centermon's Fierce Sync on their Psychic Terrain, so if you missed out on 6-star EX Giovanni, Will is a solid placeholder. As for DPS, Will gained Store Power Tiles and Store Power Confusion Synergy 2. That's a cohesive multiplier because Will doesn't have a whole lot to do until Fierce Sync. He can afford to spam Confuse Ray until he's ready to strike. The issue with Confusion Synergy 2 is that Will typically cannot grab all of his Store Power Tiles with it, unless he's running linear DPS. Do you recall that whole Toxic Power Tree debacle we had on Bugsy? It's a similar idea. One Store Power Tile with Confusion Synergy 2 is only 1% stronger than grabbing all 4 Store Power Tiles. Yes, it's weaker to a negligible degree, but it spares the turn from having to cast Confusion. Confusion Synergy 2 is impractical if Will has to sacrifice Store Power turns in order to use it. Besides that, we've got Utility. Aggravation 1 and Accuracy +5 turn Will into a reliable flinch bot, basically a poverty version of BP Morty, but that's a role in high demand in Legendary Gauntlet. Will also gained the almighty Stop Hitting Yourself 5, becoming its most accessible user. If you haven't heard about this passive before, the name makes it sound a lot less threatening than it actually is. Stop Hitting Yourself improves the chances an enemy will hit itself in confusion. Enemies with no confusion resistance hit themselves 1/3 of the time. If they have Listen Confusion 9, they hit themselves 3% of the time. I don't know exactly how Stop Hitting Yourself stacks, but from what I have read, assuming no Listen Confusion, as is the case for Sidemons, one Stop Hitting Yourself becomes a coin flip on whether the enemy hits itself or not. 3 Stop Hitting Yourself becomes an 83% chance of stopping damage. We already established Will cannot hope to outdamage Giovanni, but he can keep your tank safe through Stop Hitting Yourself. This is a very abusive passive, and it's a selling point for Will. Speaking of tanks, Will gained Sync Regen. When Will syncs, he applies Regeneration. Fortuitous 4 also grants a 50% chance to raise a stat at random, any stat except for critical hit. You cannot depend on Fortuitous 4, the buffs are very, very slow, but it gives Will a certain degree of defensive autonomy. Will is most infamous for his capacity to solo Latios, when you account for the whole Impervious plus Sync Regen plus Fortuitous 4 package. As for the random passives, we've got Unflappable, Wide Awake, and Mutually Assured. Mutually Assured is the equivalent of Synchronize in the main series games. It's not a very good passive. Lastly, Will gained the Psychic Terrain passives. When you put the Will on their Psychic Terrain, he really needs to focus on store power to justify the team slot, and these are for utility, so that won't do. Will's bread and butter is his easy nuke. I skipped the Confusion Synergy 2 because Will only has to apply Confusion on center to enable his nuke, and The turns you spend spamming Confusion on sides to bump your damage are better spent using Store Power. You just get better overall damage that way. The damage you lose from not using Confusion Synergy 2 relative to 4 Store Power tiles is minuscule. A standard wheel team composition is Custom Lily plus Bianca. Lily buffs Store Power so fast, Will and Bianca can go for a turn 2 denial on right. I am also grabbing Stop Hitting Yourself 5. Psychic Weak Centermons usually have a lower Confusion resistance, and that chance to stop enemy damage is chef's kiss. So good, dude. Stop Hitting Yourself might as well be Will's best niche relative to his competition. Alternatively, Will can play for pure DPS. I am not a big fan of such modes, but it's justifiable with Single Chris because it synergizes with her playstyle. Until Chris stacks a special move next, Will has nothing better to do other than spreading confusion, so you might as well. On type, a stacked Store Power deletes Center Mons. If you don't have the tools to set up a Store Power optimally, Will can play for air/flinches instead and complement a DPS-based striker with his nuke. This mode works much better in Legendary Gauntlet though. Speaking of Gauntlet, if you want to humor the Latios solo, this is the grid to use. The reason this works is Sync Regen. Regeneration lasts for exactly 8 attacks, so Will can cycle regeneration each time he syncs. But it's not free, it takes some RNG. It's just funny how Will can clear Latios thanks to the perks he gained. Again, I think Will is amazing and incredibly consistent, but DNA power crept the hell out of the Psychic type roster. What do you want Will to do in the face of 6-3x Giovanni? Piss himself? At best, Will is a better striker than Oak, but that's about it really. And with that, we are done with the Johto grids. Gotta keep catching up now. Thank you for watching, take care, and I hope to see you another time.